Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to the Becoming Big Bettable session. It's a thrill to see so many people in the room and so many social entrepreneurs, funders that have worked on these kinds of topics. So we're looking forward to the next 75 minutes. The way we're going to structure this morning is a little bit of conversation about some of the work and research that Bridgespan has done on this topic, a few questions for all of you in the audience, so please have a pen and piece of paper available. We're then going to do a little bit of some workshopping around some of your own ideas to share within the tables and come back at the end to both some questions and answers, as well as inviting Eric Stowe from Splash to come up and talk about some of his experience in becoming more big bettable. So that's what we're going to do this morning. Before we dive directly in, I would love to get a little bit of a sense of folks in the room in terms of the profiles. So can everyone who is a social entrepreneur seeking money and becoming big bettable, can everyone raise your hand if you're a social entrepreneur? Okay, the strong majority. Now, how many of you are involved in a fund, are a funder giving away philanthropic funds in one form or another? So, some of you. Investing. What? We call it investing. Great, fine, so perfect, and we'll get to that. In the end, you don't have the funds, but we'll get to that in a minute. And how many of you straddle these worlds? Are intermediaries seeking funds, investing funds, et cetera? So a few. Perfect. All right, that's great. So that gives a wonderful sense of the room. I hope that by the end of today's session, you will take away at least 2 or 3 ideas that actually inform the way you think about not how you just communicate your strategy, but actually the strategies that you're forming that will optimally both change the world and sustainably attract the funds to continue that change. So with that, I'm actually going to turn over to my colleague, Sridhar Prasad, who works on an enormous amount of this work with me at Bridgespan. He'll say just a couple words about Bridgespan itself, talk about our core research on big bets, and then I'll step up to talk a little bit about becoming big bettable specifically. Thank you.
Thanks, William. First, it's a pleasure to be with all of you. For those of you who don't know us, the Bridgespan Group is a social sector consulting firm. We're strategic advisors to nonprofits, foundations, and philanthropists. And our goal is to really help change makers like all of you accelerate your impact. And so we hope we can help a little bit over the course of our work today. I'll spend a few minutes just going through some of the research that we've done. And then we'll start some of the exercises as we go through. The one thing William didn't mention is that this is a bit of an experiment. We are cramming a 3-day workshop into 45 minutes. So I think this will be a taste of some of the kinds of questions that we'll go through, but hopefully it's helpful as we go through. So first, just on the research and definitions. What are big bets? Big bets are significant philanthropic donations with the ability to catalyze meaningful change for organizations and social movements. We're talking about catalytic capital here. Why are big bets important? It's because they provide that foundation, that capital that you can then use to dramatically increase scale and dramatically increase impact. For purposes of definitions, as we go through the work today, the analysis looked at philanthropic gifts over $10 million and setting that as the threshold. So as we go through the charts, that's the definition that we used. So where do donors want to give money? If you look at all of the public statements that donors have said about their intent, about what they care about, or what motivates their giving, about 80% of donors would say that social change is within their top 2 or 3 priorities. Now, what is social change? Social change is things like ending malaria. It's things like fighting childhood obesity. It's things like supporting early childhood education. It's a lot of the kinds of topics that we talk about this week. That's where the intent is, that's where the aspiration is, that's where they want to put the money. Why? It's the things that we all commonly associate with doing the most good. So that's at least the intent. But if we think about where the capital actually goes, we did an analysis of looking at the past 10 years of philanthropic gifts that are publicly available or that we can find public knowledge of, that again crossed that $10 million threshold. And if you look at where those gifts actually go, on average, about 20% of those gifts go to areas that we would characterize as social change, and about 80% go to more institutional recipients. Higher education institutions, hospitals, cultural institutions. Again, critically important, but not necessarily the agents that you would characterize as being social change, not necessarily linked to those intentions that we just talked about in the previous slide. So what explains this aspiration gap? Why is it that if 80% of donors say this is their top priority or one of their top 3 priorities, why isn't 80% of the capital going there? A couple of challenges that we found both in our conversations with donors and as we go through, as we've gone through our work over the past few years. First, on the left, the idea of mindset challenges. So first, the perception that investing in social change involves more public risk and less public reward. The sense of blowback that you might get for supporting a higher education institution or a hospital or something like that, an endowed institution in some ways, that feels less risky than, let's say, a bet to invest in the Newark Public Schools, for those of you from the US context and remember that example, or a bet to invest in urban development of some kind. Now, those all had mixed successes, but they inevitably enter into more complex environments compared to an institution. So for a donor perspective, that perception piece becomes challenging. The second is that donors may be holding social change organizations to a higher bar of success. The idea that who actually can absorb that kind of capital, the perceptions of what can be accomplished there. And the third is the challenge of securing the deals in the first place, the idea of sourcing and identifying recipients that could receive those big bets. On the right-hand side, in thinking through the challenges of deal making, first is the perception of limited shovel-ready opportunities. And this is both a perception and a reality of the number of entities that exist that can meaningfully absorb the kind of capital that we're talking about. And hopefully we'll get into a little bit of how to frame some of that over the course of the session today. The second is the lack of personal relationships. So let's again take a donor who is interested in supporting his or her alma mater. That alma mater likely has a few hundred people on development staff who are engaged in developing relationships with that person since the day they graduated an institution. They feel an emotional connection. They have a relationship. How many social change organizations can claim that same kind of relationship? And the third are difficulties in measuring and really seeing the value for money piece of it. And that is both a real challenge, but also maybe a perception challenge as well, and something that we'll want to talk about over the course of the next hour or so. So with that, that's a bit of the IP. I'll defer to William to see if there's any other reflections you'd make on our intellectual property before jumping in.
Yeah, I mean, only just 2 comments. One, the work that Sridhar has been talking about comes from 2 places. So one is this data and research that we did. So to be clear, we looked at all US-based donors, that's for institutions, individuals over a 14-year period of time, giving anywhere in the world. So it has biases inherent in it's US, it's not Europe, it's not Africa, but a large chunk of philanthropists giving in the US, Africa, Latin America, all over. And really it's quite comprehensive at the time you get to the sort of $10 million plus level. The second is it comes from the experiences that we at Bridgespan have had working on both sides of the equation, with donors and with social entrepreneurs seeking funds. And over the last 3 years, I think we've helped source or structure just about $1 billion of philanthropic commitments each year over the last 3 years in that work. So that's a little bit on the data. And the second thing I would say to just sort of bring to life a little bit some of the barriers that Sridhar has just walked through, the mindset barriers and the rest, are that there are things that are just fundamentally, in some sense unfair. I mean, he mentioned the personal commitments that a donor might have to their college or their university. There was one client that we were working with who's doing phenomenal things and was looking at a commitment to help youth in a tough city in the US. And we spent with that person 6-9 months detailing, structuring, working on the arrangement. In the end, the final grant commitment was a 7-figure commitment, but it ended up at about 70% the original size conceived because it was so thoughtfully done and tracked to achievable results and all of this stuff. And in the same period of time, this person went to their reunion at their alma mater and was thinking about giving a $10 million commitment. And yet the peer group that the person was with and the relative wealth and all of these things left making a $25 million commitment after 24 hours. And so, the level, so there are some things for the social entrepreneurs in the room, there's some things that simply are, right? There was no question made about whether the student learning outcomes at that higher educational institution would shift as a result of that gift or not, which were the exact kind of questions that were being asked of the social entrepreneur working with the youth in this lower income neighborhood. But name it, so to just sort of, there's the data and there's the facts, and there's just this sort of emotional rawness and truth. So I don't want to spend this session sort of talking about the injustice of some of those dilemmas, nor do I think the takeaway is we should lower the standards for all the work that social entrepreneurs do, forget about results. But I do think it's important as we get to the question of becoming big bettable for each of you in this room that's trying to change the world on important matters, how do you recognize and work with that reality? And what are the ways in which it's simply donor in relationship management? And what are the ways in which it actually makes your work more powerful and effective? So
with that, we'd love to start the workshop part of this. So for the next 5 minutes, would love for all of you to reflect a little bit to say, what is your big bet? Right now, if you had the opportunity over coffee at the Collaboration Cafe to bump into someone who is willing to have a conversation, what would that big bet be? How much would it be? What would it be for? A couple of bullets, let's say. Let's take about 5 minutes to go through that. And then if you finish early and the person sitting next to you is also finished, just sharing what your big bets are. What is it that you would do with that kind of catalytic capital?
Right. Attention back again. It's fantastic to hear the buzz and the ideas exchanged, and I wish I could know what every one of you is working on and what the possibilities are. So I'm jealous that you all have been at the breakout tables. Let me just ask, even for just a rough sampling, are there a couple, 3 people who would just share, what they would do with a large amount of money, and say your name and organization?
Namrika for Environmental Defense Fund. $10 million over 5 years to catalyze hundreds of billions of dollars of private capital to turn the corner on climate emissions, create thriving oceans, protect ecosystems, and safeguard human health.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Yes.
Yes. I'm Gisela Porras from Panama. I work for Bettable. It's $10 million. We secure 750 teen mothers in Panama. 30% of the kids that are born in Panama are born out of a child that would drop out of school.
Great. And let's take a couple more. This gentleman here. Here, and we have a microphone.
Sorry, I didn't keep it to 10.
No. And by the way, Cecilia Conrad from MacArthur is here. They're famous for giving $100 million.
Well, let's make it 100.
You should take
100
her
and change,
card.
maybe. I'm Seth Cochran, founder of Operation Fistula, and what I've proposed is $25 million to build a comprehensive map of gender inequality in Madagascar by treating every single woman with obstetric fistula in the country.
Great. And yes, the gentleman there, and then we'll.
Oh, thank you. I'm president of a young university college.
Yeah.
But for me, the 10 million, I didn't also keep it to 10 million, but the 10 million, I wanted to use it to give education to special needs children from primary school to the university. Because in my country, they were forgotten. Now we've started the primary school.
Yes.
I want to give them high school, and then they can get the university. How to expand that primary school to high school, and then they can come to my university and get university college education.
Great. Thank you. All right, and you seem particularly eager to share, so, but this is great.
Hi there, my name is Sarai Fuladi, founder of JARA. With $10 million, so we scale quality education to under-resourced regions through a classroom in a pocket for each child. And with $10 million, we would be able to bring 1 million of these dispersed throughout Nepal, Nigeria, the Philippines, South Sudan, and Jordan.
Wonderful, thank you. So it's, we'll have a chance for more discussion. Actually, we'll do a little breakout to work and develop your ideas actually with sort of a little bit of a structured worksheet that we have, and then share a little bit more later. But the set of problems and ideas, ways to work on these problems is remarkable even in just this small sampling. And so it leaves a question, right, which is if you believe the data that Sridhar presented, that the wealthiest people want to give away their money, and they actually, in fact, want to give it to very difficult social change issues, right? I mean, when you look at public statements, there's no billionaire that says, oh, the gift I'm really most proud of was, increasing the endowment of, the fourth richest university in the United States. Like, that's not what they say, right? They talk about this trip they took and saw this child and how they're like, So if you believe that, in fact, people want to do that, and you hear even, I mean, Skoll is a very rarefied place, but if you hear some of the ideas and topics that are out there, you say, well, why is there this aspiration gap? Like, it seems as though the money should just flow. I mean, there's a cynical perspective, right, which is actually people don't really want to give away their money. That's just what they say. We don't believe that's true, right? I mean, from the work with wealthy people, the desire to give it away is deeply genuine. And in fact, later in life, often well past sort of active intellectual engagement in their philanthropic pursuits, people do in fact give away very, very large sums of money, right? So we've worked with one gentleman who at 75 was saying, I'm not going to worry about it now. I'll worry about it, 5 or 10 years down the road. So why is it that, these decisions get delayed or maybe don't end up sending funds to the kinds of topics for which there's genuine passion? So Sridhar mentioned some of the mental gaps or some of the unfairness about the expectations and some of the limitations of relationships and all of that. And those are true. And philanthropies need to work on those. What we'd like to spend our time here doing is talking about, from the standpoint of the social entrepreneur, what can you do to help make this match more powerful to better address the toughest social problems? And there's the worksheet we're going to go through has 5 characteristics of a strong big bet, or a strong big bettable investment concept. But I actually want to leave you with 2 thoughts about ways that the common approaches or the most frequent approaches of social entrepreneurs simply miss the mark. And the first is the discussion of the problem that you're in. Can I get a couple people to say, like, what is the problem that you're trying to address? Why does it matter to the world? Will a couple people just say, like, what the problem they're working on is? Yes,
Schools
David.
destroyed by natural disasters don't get replaced within the first 10 years.
Okay, fantastic. Yes?
Governments don't care enough about human rights.
Governments don't care enough about human rights. Let's get a couple more. And say your name and organization.
I'm Mark Wolf, the chair of Integrity Initiatives International for these purposes, and we're dedicated primarily to establishing an international anti-corruption court to combat grand corruption, which is closely correlated with the worst abuses of human rights and many other devastating consequences.
Great. Let's get a couple more. Sorry. The lady in the blue, and then in the back with the black jacket.
Catherine Hansen, A-Learn, close the achievement gap for low-income students in California who are currently the majority of students in the state of California. They're not getting to college, and they will be locked out of future jobs.
Yeah. Great. And in the back, the young lady with the black jacket.
Hi, I'm Kim. I'm an undergraduate business student from Vancouver, and the problem we're working on is tackling medical waste management in Vancouver's hospitals to try to combat the environmental impact that incineration of medical waste has.
Phenomenal. Okay, all right, one more because this is just too good, but yes, over here.
It's a good one.
Okay.
It costs us $1.4 trillion per year from here to 2030
of the Sustainable Development Goals, and the global aid budget is only about $130 to $200 billion per year, so we have a massive gap.
Right, a 90% gap. So I'll share with you one anecdote from outside this room of an organization that had put together a pitch for a big bet and did not get it, with some very innovative forestry approaches that address the issue of climate change, and of course in their articulation of the problem of climate change and global warming and the consequences to the Earth of a greater than 2 degrees Celsius rise in temperature was incredibly compelling, right? I mean, not everyone here is in the environmental space, but it turns out it's like really bad if the world gets too warm. But the reason I point that out, and the reason that, in fact, it's interesting to hear the problems that folks are working on, is that in our experience, even with the most sophisticated social entrepreneurs, in their communications to donors, the majority, more than 50% of the time, of the written materials, of the images in the written materials, all of these things, sometimes it's 80%, are about the problem, right? With the goal of saying, let me convince you, slight or significant moral twinge, how important the problem we're working on is and why it's absolutely critical that we work on it. Now, it's very understandable from a human psychology standpoint why this is. Everyone that's a social entrepreneur is you're dedicating your life to creating this change. And in fact, every one of these changes is of the utmost importance, right? Human rights, corruption, education, climate devastation, neglected tropical diseases, it's incredibly important. The problem with that from a standpoint is that we live in a world that's rich in problems, right? Having a problem of moral and economic significance is actually not a particularly differentiating thing, right? And so one of the things from a donor standpoint is, and this is particularly, by the way, true where the person of the wealth is engaged in the decision-making more so than at a structured institutional foundation, is that they are faced on a daily basis with more problems of worth than can possibly be addressed. And there's a little bit of an arms race going on where nonprofits say, well, the way we're going to break through is to make the problem we're working on even more compelling. That arms race takes place in the materials and the communications approaches. It takes place in the data and facts about it. So the example I gave of the climate change organization, or the environmental organization addressing climate change, they were an A+, a phenomenal job of communicating the devastation to the Earth of a 2-degree rise, of a greater than 2-degree rise in temperature. The problem with that is twofold. One is it's impossible for a donor to say, well, how much do I value that versus torture and human rights abuses? Like, what's the relative importance of those two things? It's also hard because the bigger you make the challenge, the farther whatever it is you're going to do seems to be from the challenge. So the fatal flaw of this environmental group was people were like, wow, we got to do something about this climate. And this initiative you have in forestry seems incredibly innovative. Well, how many degrees Celsius difference is that going to make? Right? I mean, you can guess where the answer was. It wasn't like, oh, that's 1.5 of the 2 points that we're trying to limit. It was like, well, we haven't really estimated that. Maybe it's 1/100% of a point. And so then all of a sudden the donor's like, well, you just got me all excited about what's going to happen to the Earth, and I want to do this thing, and all that stuff's still going to happen to the Earth, right? So what have we done? So you have an enormous, so the more we focus on the problems, A, the less you can frankly differentiate, and B, the farther the gap is between whatever can actually be accomplished and what's being done. So one of the insights that we have from working with donors over the years is that most people actually care about most things. If you say, what would a person go to their grave feeling as though they have spent their life well on the Earth, there's actually many, many issues for which that would be true. So there's no shortage of problems. What there is an enormous shortage of are powerful investment concepts, right? If we say, how many problems exist on the earth today, how many of them have existed on the earth for the last 10 years, how many will be here 10 years from now, there's a sense that like it's very hard to actually check the box and make progress on things. So what's rare is something that can actually talk about progress. So we're going to come to that in a little bit more structured way in a second. The second thing that I want to talk about is a misconception. So the first is the overemphasis on the problem and the building up of the magnitude of the problem. But the second thing is a question of where's the money going to come from? Is it new versus old money? I was in a meeting with a very talented social entrepreneur a few months ago, and the person expressed something that we've heard in one form or another from dozens of incredible social entrepreneurs. The person said to me quite directly, can you get me lunch with Bill Gates? Because I think if I had lunch with him and he heard about this problem and what we're doing, he would like write the check and we would be done. And actually the person was quite serious. It wasn't, you know, like a dream kind of thing. And, you know, and of course, I mean, I don't know Bill, you know, I can't arrange his lunch schedule, so it wasn't going to happen either way. But I'm actually quite confident, even not knowing him, that that's just not how it works, right? It's not that you get lunch and you're done. And in fact, the data that we have, and I'll just actually flip to some data, is when we looked at every single grant from this database that we referred to, on average, each $10 million gift was the 5th gift to that organization or cause. And it was a 10 times step up, a multiple, of the most recent prior gift. So the pattern of big bets is not lunch with a billionaire you've never met before who then writes you a big check, nor is it, you know, steady 10% growth per year forever. Actually what it is about being in relationship so that there's enough trust in the leadership and in the cause and what you're doing, and that there's then a breakthrough moment. There's a moment where the donor says, this isn't just a person I believe in and a cause I care about because I actually have 100 of those. This actually is one of the 5 best things I've seen where I believe my money can create enduring and sustaining change. And you move from being the 50th biggest gift to being the 3rd biggest gift because the investment concept you present is better than it has ever been. It is one of the most distinctive things. And again, it's not about elevating the problem because all 50 of the problems carry that moral power and strength. It's about the solution and what you do to break through. So these are the 2 insights that have most come out of our work. And where that has led us is to a basic framework of like, what are the elements of being big bettable? And you'll see them. The first is that there's an important problem. The last is that there's a strong leader and team. Now, I don't know each of you personally or the problems we're working on, but my conjecture is that each of you does an A job, does a first-rate job on those 2 dimensions. You wouldn't be here at Skoll if you didn't have a great leader and team. And you wouldn't be here if you weren't addressing an important problem. In our experience, most nonprofit concepts are top of the mark on those. And the middle 3 are weak, right? The middle 3 are weak. What is the point of arrival? So again, go to the environmental organization. So great that climate change is a big deal, but where is it? What am I buying? If it's not solving this whole problem, what is it I'm buying? An example of a client I have there that works with kids in the child welfare space in the United States. There are a couple of million kids. There's no way they're going to move the whole system. In the United States, 23,000 kids per year leave state custody. They turn 18 or 21, depending on the state, never having been reunited with their family, never having been adopted, bouncing from foster home to foster home, and they have the worst outcomes of any population group in the United States. Imprisonment, unemployment, prostitution, drugs, you name it. But it's only 23,000. And so this nonprofit said, we're actually going to not focus on the 2 million, but we're going to focus on this 23,000 per year. That was a point of arrival where actually a coherent plan could be put together, and it was big enough to matter, but small enough to achieve. The second is this credible path. So whatever your point of arrival is, what actually is the path that gets you there in a believable way? simple enough to say, hard enough to put together. And the final element is why philanthropy, right? To some extent, the vast majority of philanthropy, the pitches that philanthropists receive are the same basic story. I don't know if any of you were humanities students in your days in college, but I remember in my English classes there was something like, there's only like 10 stories in the world, and there's the sort of the hero, there's the man versus society. I mean, there's like just there's 7 or 8, 10 storylines, and they're all repeated in different ways. 90% of philanthropic pitches actually have one storyline. Here's an important problem. We're doing innovative stuff. Can you give me money to do more stuff? And it doesn't really stand out. So the question is, if you have an important rival point and a credible path, what is it that philanthropy is doing? If X dollars just allows you to do 5% more of something that will achieve a total penetration on the problem of 2%, it's actually that same storyline, just more money for more stuff. So is there a place in which philanthropy plays a distinctive role? That can be about leverage, it can be about completing the task, but why do you have a recipe with 5 great ingredients, and this is the 6th and missing ingredient to make the whole thing come together? So these are the 3 places, the 3 of the 5 criteria that we think are typically underinvested in, and actually this first and last tend to be the largest and most common. So what I'm going to do is, or the way we want to structure this, is to ask you all, I think at each table there should be a handout or a couple of printouts with a gray column on the left that have these 5 elements. So does everyone see them on their tables? Great. We would love to take the next 10 minutes or so and ask you to take the Big Bettable idea that you came up with and begin to fill out these aspects. And if you only actually fill out the middle 3 and forget about the other 2, that's fine. So spend your time on the middle 3 and try and detail what that idea is that you had. And really specifically, what's the arrival point that could be achieved 5 years, say, something that's not too far out. Why do you actually believe you can get there? Like, what are the 3 elements or the 3 aspects that make you think it's credible that you could achieve that? And then what is the special role of philanthropy? Is it, let me tell you, the role of philanthropy is you pay 100% of the bill and this is what we get done. Or is there something that's more distinctive about the role of philanthropy? I would love to take 10 minutes on this, and then we're going to do a little bit of sharing around that, and then open for broader questions and answers.
And if anyone doesn't have a handout, let us know. We've
got
some extras, and so happy to pass them around.
Cool. Thank you. Great. Even though the conversations now seem lively and excellent, I want to ask everyone to bring their attention back to the center of the room so that we can share with the full group. One logistical note, a number of people came up and asked whether or not they can get a copy of this one slide. The 2 ways we can do that. One, we're going to post. We're going to post on the session notes from this on the app that everyone has for the conference. This one slide, so you'll have it there. Also, if anyone who would like to after this can just give me or Sridhar your business card, we'll email to you a copy, so you can get that there. So what I would love to do now, a little bit like we did before when we asked you the nature of your problem, I would love a few volunteers to share the work that they've been doing and discussing at their tables, but not the problem or anything about your leadership and team, but actually these middle 3 things. So what is it that you're working on? What is it that could be achieved with a big bet, the arrival point that would be reached with that? Why is it that you actually think credibly you can get there? And then why is philanthropy the missing ingredient? Why are the other ingredients present, but philanthropy itself is what's missing? And obviously, we could delve for an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours on these kinds of things for each concept. So I'm going to ask you to do the difficult thing of trying in like 30 seconds to give the highlights of this. So let's get, and we'll say, and the number of people that can share will be dependent on how closely we abide to that sort of 30-second guideline. So let me, yes, in the back, in the jacket, and we'll be passing around the mic because this is being recorded.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Fiona McCauley, the founder of the WILD Network, Women Innovators and Leaders Network. My specific goal is to support 1,000 female founders of social enterprises to scale their impact while thriving personally. I'm following the format here. And to do this by supporting fellowship programs, accelerators, donors and investors to understand what women social entrepreneurs need specifically to scale their impact and thrive personally. The enduring impact is that by adopting these best practices for supporting female entrepreneurs to scale, these fellowship programs, investors, and others would continue to do it over their lifetime. But for understanding the information about the small but critical differences that they need to make, they will continue to miss the opportunity to get a greater return on their investment of the female social entrepreneurs they're investing in.
You don't have to do every bullet.
Okay. The credible path will be to work with those pioneering organizations who've already come to understand the differences, the specific support that women social entrepreneur founders need, to harvest that expertise, to consolidate it, and then to share it out more broadly in order to leverage the positive peer pressure impact and to share data about the greater return on investment that initiatives are getting by supporting female founders in the way that they need to be supported. Why philanthropy is that with a small investment of donor dollars to accelerate the surfacing of this information, the dissemination and the uptake, all of the investors in social enterprises can more quickly get a return on an investment. So by investing in the leaders, they're getting a greater ROI on the money that they're already investing.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman in the front, and then we'll go to the lady at the side.
My name is Hamoon, Audacious Futures. We are reimagining higher education, a University of the Future model that is debt-free, degree-free, and lecture-free. We think this is possible because the goal we're going for is 2.5 times the benefits at half the cost and half the time. We think this is doable because we've already got interview guarantees from employers like Deloitte, major banks, and others. And the role of philanthropy in this particular situation is the business model will pay for itself over the long term. Philanthropy will ensure access and equity for those who might not otherwise have access to these opportunities.
Great. Thank you. Let's do 2 more briefly. This lady here, and then the gentleman there in the beige sweater.
All right, I'm Avery Bang, and I run an organization called Bridges to Prosperity. And real quick problem is the 1 in 7 people are physically isolated in the world. Can't get to where they need to go. So the point of arrival is in the country of Rwanda, there are 640,000 people that currently are not able to have year-round access to healthcare, education, and markets. And the enduring impact is when you connect those people through physical transportation infrastructure, like the bridges, literal kind of bridges, you have permanent access. Everyone Forever will cost us $20 million in 10 years. And credible path is that we've actually identified all 355 locations that would serve those 640,000 people and are working with the government of Rwanda to actually be paying for about 50% of the total costs. The reason philanthropy is so important for us is to take on both risk capital, but more importantly, outcome and output buyers, since we will actually be able to mobilize both private capital as well as the public sector investment.
Great. Thank you. And the last thought.
Okay, great. Sorry, I'm going to face this way because there's more people. My project, is $25 million to comprehensive gender inequality map, and every woman in the country who has obstetric fistula is treated. So the point of Arrival is that comprehensive map has to be able to show everywhere where there's maternal mortality, gender-based violence, and access to family planning, and it has to have integrated algorithms to predict where these problems are happening and how the government and multilaterals can take action. And it has to be owned by the government, okay? We also have to treat 50,000 women around the country and have referral systems that make sure any new cases get referred quickly, so it's not destigmatized. The credible path is that we have started to engage with government and multilaterals on all data sets that are currently being collected in the country regarding population or sexual and reproductive health. We have a clinical and community surveillance system that we've developed that allows our direct performance-based funding to the individual to be distributed. That has to essentially be put into every hospital in the country that has, there's 15 fistula hospitals in the country. And the community health networks need to be fully engaged. We then need to scale that up on a region by region basis and to feed the data to the bigger institutional partners, Gates Foundation, PATH, PSI, et cetera. Why philanthropy? Government has the staff, the facilities. WHO and UNFPA have the data surveillance systems already in place. There's nobody who can do analysis. So they have lots of data, but they don't have any information. You know, they don't have any ability to act on these insights. We've started to do this already with plague. We did help with the plague outbreak in the same sort of capacity. So we know that, and they know that they need business intelligence from corporate philanthropists like the Tableau Foundation, and they need resources at the point of care, right? So they need money to go directly to the point of care, and that's what philanthropy can fill that gap. So,
great.
Thanks.
Thank you. So I deeply appreciate the sharing of each one of you, and I'm sure that there would be richness in hearing about the thoughts of each of your groups, and the shift from thinking about the problem that you're addressing, and in some sense big numbers of what can be achieved, to some of the elements of how you'll create the change is the place where in some sense I think we as a sector underinvest a little bit, right? It's not the nature of how we create change isn't what stirs our passions to dedicate our lives to social change. It's actually the injustices or the problems. But the competitive field, if you will, from a standpoint of attracting big bets, but also the competitive field from the standpoint of actually creating scaled, enduring change in the world is actually about the nature of change. So when in the first part of this conversation, I mentioned that most donors care about most things, which is true, right? That there are many topics that could provide meaning in life to address. The converse of that is that most donors actually have pretty fixed beliefs about how the world changes. So we work with a donor that started a significant tech company from nothing to a major corporation, and the kinds of things that donor is looking at are tech-based solutions in a startup phase to grow. We work with a private equity individual who has made a fortune taking underperforming assets and helping them perform more strongly. This person is actually interested in funding significant network nonprofits that are underperforming, right? So there's one individual that we work with that believes that anything government touches gets screwed up and doesn't want to do it. And there's another individual exactly on the other side of the equation who made a career in sort of government sort of funded activities that says government's the whole ballgame. If you don't shift the way government acts, nothing changes. So the reason that this is relevant is that if the competitive field to actually achieve change, and certainly to communicate what's distinctive about the change you seek to achieve, is on these elements, how much do you stand out in your work from all the other kinds of opportunities around the credibility of the arrival point, the path you're going to take to get there, and this particular role the ingredient philanthropy plays in it, you actually now are actually in a very different conversation with donors about their beliefs about how the world changes, about the ways in which you match there, and that's the place to think. As we wrap up, I'm actually going to ask Eric to come up on stage here for a second. Eric Stowe. It's a giant, but you're a handsome man, and I'm going to sit with him. And and Eric actually worked with us piloting some of our work on these ideas. And I'm just going to ask, Eric, why don't you just you actually need this, I don't. Can you just introduce yourself just a little bit about Splash and what we did together, and I'll ask a couple of questions.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Eric Stowe, Splash. We are a water, sanitation, and hygiene organization. We focus on cities because that's where the poorest are going, and therein we focus on kids because they're the most at risk. And even beyond that, we focus on schools and hospitals primarily because that's where we can see the highest concentration of those kids. So we work on programs in really big cities around the world to try and create irreversible change as it relates to WASH.
Great. And Eric, can you just describe, a year ago or whenever, or a year and a couple of months ago when we first started to talk, sort of where were you in the pursuit of your ambitions and your fundraising, and what were some of the challenges?
Sure. We had our first big bet in 2010, so it was an investment of us. We consider it kind of our Series A. It was 11.5 million at a time when our budget annually was like 1.2, something like that. So it was a significant trajectory-altering investment in us. And it was the fifth ask. I like that was, and it was a tenfold increase. But what's happened since, and I think many orgs our size are kind of victim to this, that because we get in these 1 and possibly 2 and hopefully 3-year grant cycles, while our organizations are getting bigger, I think our pitches are actually becoming more myopic because we are really in these 12-month cycles, and then we're renegotiating for a new grant. And our perspectives, while organizationally they're pretty distant and far-reaching, in the immediate term, when I'm pitching over the last 10 years, it's gotten closer and closer to real time. So one of the things that happened with Bridgespan, they came in and really kicked our butts. Came to Seattle, it was a team of 4 who came, and then we had our entire management team go to Boston and spent 3 days with their team doing a lot of introspection, a lot of cleaning out the clutter. And in the interim between the first visit and the second, they were connecting with content experts, some of our funders, and folks in the general WASH space, as well as just the nonprofit field, and trying to understand better what Splash's positioning and unique differentiation and just kind of role in the market might be. So we came to them from day one with a lot of external views that weren't always kind, and some of that was self-derived, but it was quite a unique process. I'm happy to talk about where we landed, but we were focused on the problem. And it took you an entire day to pull the point of arrival out of us. Yeah. I mean, we're just so accustomed.
Yeah, I mean, I would make 2 observations. One is they're working on a very important problem and communicate it powerfully. I mean, they have drone pictures of some of the areas they work that are unbelievable and communicate that well. I mean, the 2 things, in our observation when we first started talking to Eric, I mean, besides believing that they were it was a phenomenal organization, and he has not communicated the innovativeness of and the sort of business-like way they actually change water systems, which is impressive. But the 2 things that we sort of observed, one was this myopia of like what Splash was asking for money for, and essentially it boiled down, and not to, hopefully this is fair, was we've had a set of goals for the last 10 years, and we're kind of 80% of the way there, and we really need someone to help us get there. Like, we don't have enough money to quite finish, which isn't super inspiring. So that was one dynamic. The other was there was actually one particular fundamental question people asked about the nature of what you were doing and whether it would create the arrival point of cleaner water and the health that results from it that seemed to be not being discussed. So do you want to just say sort of where things have what changes your team has adopted?
Sure, and I think part of it, alluding to my earlier comments, we focus so much on the school. I see a few of our current funders now, and it's interesting that last year at Skoll, we started unpacking with this new language about using the school as the launch pad to greater community interventions, which no one had ever heard external, because it was really this internalized thing. Our team knew it, all of our staff knew it, the schools knew it, but we had never really talked about it because we wanted that first endpoint to be the schools, but that was never the arrival point. And so we had a hard time getting ourselves out of that language. Right now we are in the throes of, we believe, the tail end of a $30 million pitch. And it's focused on 3 target cities. So the first is Addis in Ethiopia, the second is Kolkata in India, and the third is Dhaka in Bangladesh. And each has a completely different means of intervention and then a different model for replication thereafter. But the goal in each is that we can do 100% coverage in those 3 cities, and then by extension, we can slowly draw down our services and get the hell out of the way so that government can take on the cost, can take on the ownership, and local staff can do the implementation thereto after. We weren't talking about that. We were talking before, how do we just get into more schools when the arrival point just wasn't articulated well.
Great.
So
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I would just love now, how many, we have 1 minute left? 5 minutes left? Okay, 5 minutes left. So let me just, I just appreciate the engagement and the energy and sort of your own, brainstorming and in the conversations, and I feel bad that, at each time we shared, there were so many more people that had great things to share. So let's just take questions for our last 5 minutes and yeah. Okay, yeah, so what? Thanks, Eric. Yeah. Okay, or Eric, come back. Actually, in fact, Sridhar, why don't we just pull up a third chair here?
What's comical is this is way too big, but this is Splash's Series B, that derived from those Bridgespan meetings. We've got our Chapter 2 document with the Chapter 3 in sight. How do we actually see this replicate beyond the core countries where we're at? So, this is wholly derived from those meetings and is kind of the foundation for every conversation we have with donors.
And in the end, for you all, the notion of chapters ended up resonating. The first big bet you got was really the first chapter of Splash. And that's often the easiest place to get a bit, it's like going from not really something to being existing is a very obvious kind of role, but then this Chapter 2 was crafted there. So, great. The question for Eric.
Yeah, it's actually kind of for both of you. First of all, thank you for a very engaging and insightful workshop. This has been fantastic. I'm curious about the engagement. How did the engagement essentially surface things for changing your strategy? Did the interaction?
Yes, and when I said introspection, it was my program director and I were bemoaning ourselves after the first night. It's like, holy shit, why are we here? It was really tough that first evening after, getting our butts kicked by 8 different Bridgespan staff. Like, what do you mean when you say this? Do you actually have the proof points? On and on and on. It was incredible, and by the third day, we had calved off several sections of what, questionable things that we were thinking about for our long-range strategy and really honed in on these 3 target cities. Kolkata and Addis were in there, Dhaka was not, and fundamentally our strategy for the next 5 years. 20% change?
Yes. And say your name and an organization or affiliation.
And my question is, a lot of times big bets mean scale, and scale means growing, and growing means not just more program staff and more programming, but administrative staff, operations staff, all of those people that you need to actually absorb all of the money that you're asking for. And my experience is funders don't always get that, and that's not the sexy part of it to them. So have you had any experience in the work that you've been doing at Bridgespan or Eric in how you communicate that to funders so that they get that what they need to be funding in large part is actually the operations growth of the organization so that you can sustain and support the growth on the program side?
So two thoughts on that. One is, for sure, this is a classic tension. How much money is restricted? How much only goes to programs? How much allows you to do what you're doing? And that's almost always a tension that we see. The potential benefit of thinking about a big bet, thinking very crisply about an arrival point, is that you actually have something that someone can understand that they're buying in the investment or in the funding that they make, and that can hopefully lead to less restriction and conversation about what the money goes to or not. In fact, now that's not always the case, particularly with certain structured, professionally staffed institutional foundations. There may just be policies and things that can't be altered, and that's not great. But when the principals who've generated the wealth are involved, typically you actually can get to that point that you're hoping for if you can articulate something where the whole is what's being supported. The second point I guess I would make on that is that sometimes the concerns are that something is fundamentally unsustainable, right? That if you scale an organization and its work and all of that, that it will need an equal amount of philanthropic support every 5 years forever, every 10 years forever. And that actually isn't a communications or a policy issue. It's a fundamental strategy issue, which is that actually the best way to change the world? And in one of the articles that we have there, we profile 10 different types of big bets that we see out there in the marketplace. Some are much less frequently deployed than perhaps they should be. But one of the reference I made earlier to the Child Welfare Organization, one of the things in their strategy that shifted, besides the arrival point being the kids aging out of foster care, was actually the pathway to get there, where they made a fundamental shift to using licensing to other existing providers as a method of spreading versus fully staffing up and spreading their own.
Yeah, I'd add two quick things. Yeah. One is, so a colleague of ours who's also here named Michael Etzel wrote an article about 6 months ago where he talks about sort of organizational health as in some ways of a pyramid, and thinking about the base of that pyramid really being core organizational operation and ability to have resilient capital. And that scale really becomes the top of that pyramid. So if you're only going for that scale capital, what is undeniably true is that capital will then almost leak down to the foundation if that foundation isn't strong. So however you frame that bet, making sure that you are framing truthfully what is that infrastructure investment that's needed. Otherwise, the results will never match that ambition. So that's the first. The second is a purely logistical point, which is we apologize that we were not able to staple the copies, but there should be hopefully articles on the tables sort of separated by those green sheets. And so those are the packets there. So please feel free to take them. We have extras as well.
Yes.
Thank you. You mentioned the issue of about how to frame the pitch about the sustainability of the project, yeah. Whether they will need, the organization will need that same kind of money again.
Yeah.
And I hear you, and that happens a lot, but my question is, are the problems ever solved? I mean, is there any single organization that has sorted out and then we don't have to worry about this again next? I mean, don't we always have to be receiving money and trying to tackle the issue?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and maybe it's one we even will end on as, and Sridhar and I will stay afterwards. But this question of solution is a very difficult term, right? Because many of the things that we all work on are intractable and never fully disappear and are gone. And that creates this dilemma that we wrestle with, right? Which is if we talk about massive problems, and yet what we're not actually proposing are solutions to those problems, and we're just doing good works that ameliorate or address those problems, we're left with something that's unsatisfying to the donor, but more importantly, I think in some sense pressures our own thinking, right, about how much of this is about doing good works. And the notion of what arrival point you articulate for the external supporters is even more important for your own management team and for yourselves, which is like, what if we can never really solve the problem that motivates us, what is it that we can actually achieve that's enduring? And I guess, to me, that's where this becomes not a communications issue at all, but a fundamental strategic issue, which is like, well, what is it that you can achieve which is enduring? Which may not be, the end of human trafficking, right? I mean, it may not be something as enormous or august as that. But if the answer is nothing, right? If the answer is nothing is an enduring change, then maybe you're not working on the right thing. So what is that element that is enduring? And it doesn't have to be, again, a whole problem being away. You have to be able to articulate something where you could convince yourself, if you can convince yourself that whatever is enduring and arrives is worthy of your lifeblood, then I suspect it will be worthy of the funding support of someone else. And what is that? And it can be the fundamental reorientation of 3 cities and their health. It doesn't have to be every city on earth. So it can be something about size or ambition, or it can be things that are about cultural change. It can be things about changing norms. I mean, there's an unlimited number of things that can endure, but I don't think as a sector we push ourselves frequently enough to say, what is it that we do where when we hang up our coat, it is an enduringly different, as opposed to when are we fighting the good fight? And really to unleash the big streams of capital, it's not about fighting the good fight. It's about what can endure. So, thank you. Great. Thank you all.
Thank you.